Hey everyone, and welcome to our deep dive today. We're going to be looking at something pretty interesting. Well, I think interesting anyway.
Oh, absolutely.
The intersection of the Bible and modern science.
Yeah.
There's actually a lot more overlap there than you might think.
More than you'd think at first glance.
Yeah, so we've got some sources lined up for this. We're going to be looking at cases where the Bible kind of seemed to predict scientific discoveries.
Okay.
We'll be looking at specific scientific claims that are actually in the Bible. And then we're also going to look at some arguments that are being made
Okay.
about how some scientific findings actually support a young universe and a young Earth from a biblical perspective.
Right.
So this is a topic that can be
Kind of complex for sure. And, for some folks, it can even be a little sensitive.
yeah.
But we're just going to stick to the facts
Yeah.
that are presented in our sources, and
Sure.
we're going to let you, the listener, draw your own conclusions.
Absolutely. We just want to lay it all out there.
And let people come to their own conclusions.
Exactly. So let's dive right in.
Yeah.
First up, we're going to explore the idea of the Bible as a kind of a scientific precursor.
Okay.
One of the sources highlights this really fascinating story about Matthew Maury.
Oh, yeah.
He was a 19th century oceanographer
Mm-hmm.
who was really inspired by the Bible.
Right.
He was especially taken by a couple of verses. Psalm 8.8, which talks about the paths of the seas, and then Ecclesiastes 1.6, which mentions the wind returning to its circuits.
Interesting.
These verses really made him think, if the Bible mentions paths in the sea, they must actually be there. Right. So he wanted to prove it scientifically.
Okay, so how did he go about that?
Well, he was a man of science, so he did what any good scientist would do. He spent years looking over ship logs and charts
Wow.
and just plotting wind and current data. And guess what?
What happened?
He found them.
Wow.
He ended up identifying major ocean currents, including the Gulf Stream,
The Gulf Stream, that's amazing.
which had a massive effect on navigation. Ships could now use these currents to cut down travel times, which made sea voyages much safer and more efficient.
Yeah, much more predictable.
Right. And it gets even more interesting. You ready for this?
Yeah, lay it on me.
Some monuments dedicated to Maury explicitly state that he was inspired by the Bible.
Oh, wow.
Some of them even have the verses on them
Really?
that he used. That's
Huh.
amazing.
That's really
It
cool.
really makes you think about faith and the role it can play in these scientific discoveries.
Yeah, it really challenges the way we typically think about these things.
Yeah. Do you think this is a case of the Bible guiding scientific discovery? Or do you think it's just a really interesting coincidence?
Well, I mean, it's hard to say definitively, right?
Right.
But it definitely raises some interesting questions about the relationship between faith and science. I
Right.
mean, can scientific findings ever really prove or disprove religious texts?
Yeah, it's a fascinating question. Okay, so for the next section, we're going to switch gears a little bit, and we're going to look at specific scientific claims that are found within the Bible itself.
Okay, so claims made in the Bible.
Yeah. Yeah.
Interesting.
We're going to focus on a few that I think are particularly interesting. We'll start with astronomy,
Okay.
because everyone loves looking at the stars
Absolutely.
and thinking about the universe.
It's awe-inspiring.
Yeah. One of the claims that the Bible makes is that stars are innumerable.
Innumerable.
Yeah. This is mentioned in Genesis 22.17
Mhm.
and Jeremiah 33.22, where they're compared to grains of sand on the seashore.
Wow.
Like just countless,
Yeah.
beyond what humans can comprehend.
That's a pretty good analogy.
Yeah. And you know what? That's not too far off from what modern astronomy actually tells us.
Was it really?
Even with the strongest telescopes, we can only see a very small fraction of the universe. It's mind-boggling how many stars are out there.
Yeah, it really is.
And what's even more fascinating is that the Bible doesn't just talk about the number of stars. It also says that they differ in glory.
Oh.
This is from 1 Corinthians 15.41. So it's not just talking about little points of light, but it's actually hinting at a diversity in their nature.
I see.
And this is where modern astronomy comes in.
Okay.
We now know that stars come in a huge variety of sizes and colors and temperatures
Right.
and luminosities. It's incredible how this ancient text kind of foreshadows our modern understanding of the diversity of stars.
Yeah, that is fascinating. It really makes you think.
It does.
Okay, so moving on from the stars, let's look at geology.
Okay.
See if there are any connections there. One that comes to mind is the water cycle.
Oh, yeah.
Ecclesiastes 1.7 and Isaiah 55.10. These verses talk about water evaporating And forming clouds and then returning to Earth as rain?
It's something we all learn in school,
Right,
right?
exactly. But a full scientific understanding of the water cycle took centuries to develop.
Yeah, it wasn't until much later
Yeah.
that we really understood its role in weather patterns and shaping landscapes and all that.
Yeah. It's amazing to think about how these fundamental processes were observed and recorded in the Bible, even though they weren't explained in the same way that modern science does.
Yeah, I mean, the Bible wasn't intended to be a science textbook,
Right.
but it's still interesting to see these connections.
It is.
Okay, so let's move on to biology.
Okay.
The Bible actually mentions blood circulation
Really?
in Leviticus 17:11. It talks about how blood is essential for life.
Well, yeah. Of course we know that now.
Right. It seems obvious to us now, but back then it was a pretty revolutionary concept.
It really was. I mean, think about it. It took centuries of scientific study to fully understand how the circulatory system works.
Yeah, like how the heart pumps blood and how it's all transported throughout the body.
Exactly.
It's amazing how complex it all is.
It really is a beautifully designed system.
And the Bible, in its own way, seems to touch on this, centuries before science really figured it out.
It's really remarkable
It is.
when you think about it.
Okay, so now for our next section, we're going to get into something that's a little bit more debated.
Okay.
The scientific argument for a young universe and a young Earth.
Yeah, this is where things get a little more interesting.
Yeah, it can be a sensitive topic,
Yeah.
but we're just going to present the arguments as they're laid out in our sources.
Right. We're not taking sides here.
Exactly. We just want to give you the information and let you decide what you think.
Absolutely.
So buckle up,
Yep.
because it's going to be a fascinating ride.
It is.
Okay.
So let's dive into these arguments for a young universe and a young Earth. It's fascinating how even with all the advancements in science, there are still these different viewpoints.
Especially when you bring the Bible into it.
Exactly. So just to be clear, mainstream science generally accepts that the universe is about 13.8 billion years old,
Okay.
and the Earth is about 4.5 billion years old.
Right.
But some people and organizations, often from a creationist perspective, propose scientific arguments that challenge those ages.
Right. And our sources like Answers in Genesis and the Institute for Creation Research, they present some of these arguments.
Okay, so what kind of arguments are they making?
Well, one of them has to do with the amount of mud on the seafloor.
Mud on the seafloor.
Yeah. They argue that if the Earth were really billions of years old, there should be a much thicker layer of sediment.
Okay, so they're saying the amount we see now isn't enough for billions of years.
Right. They say it points to a much younger Earth.
Interesting.
They also talk about the amount of sodium in the ocean.
Sodium.
Yeah. They say if the Earth were billions of years old, the current sodium levels are way too low.
That's fascinating.
They suggest that this could be explained by a much shorter time frame for Earth's history.
Okay, so a shorter time frame that lines up with their interpretation of the Bible.
Right. Another argument they use is the decay of Earth's magnetic field.
Oh, yeah, I've heard about that.
They point to research that shows that the field has been weakening over time. And if you extrapolate that weakening back over billions of years, it would mean that the field was incredibly strong in the past.
So strong that it could have made life on Earth impossible.
Exactly. So they argue that this supports a younger Earth,
Mm.
where the magnetic field wouldn't have had time to decay so much.
Okay, I see their point.
And then there's the argument about the fossil record,
Right.
which we touched on a bit earlier. They point to the gaps, or the
Right.
missing links, as evidence against a long, gradual evolutionary process.
So if evolution occurred over millions of years, we should see a smooth progression of fossil forms, showing those transitions between species.
But they see these abrupt appearances of new life forms as supporting the idea of separate acts of creation.
As described in the Bible.
Exactly.
Okay, but doesn't mainstream science have responses to these arguments?
Of course. For example, with the mud on the seafloor, they point to plate tectonics in the process of subduction, where the oceanic crust is recycled back into the Earth's mantle. This process would limit the buildup of sediment over time.
Okay, I can see that.
And for the sodium levels in the oceans, they explain it through the constant exchange of minerals between seawater and the ocean floor, plus the formation of those massive salt deposits that we see throughout history.
Right.
As for Earth's magnetic field, they point out that it's actually fluctuated and reversed multiple times throughout history. It hasn't just steadily decayed.
So a simple extrapolation backwards might not be accurate.
Exactly. And when it comes to the fossil record, mainstream science acknowledges that it's incomplete, but they point to the many transitional fossils that have been found.
Right.
They argue that these fossils do show evolutionary lineages, even if the record isn't perfectly continuous.
So it really comes down to different interpretations of the same data.
Yeah.
Some of those interpretations align with a biblical worldview.
Okay, so let's shift gears a bit here
Ah.
and talk about something else that one of our sources brought up.
Okay, what's...
The Institute for Creation Research emphasizes that the Bible shouldn't be seen as a science textbook,
Okay.
but that doesn't mean it's totally devoid of scientific insights.
So they're saying there are still connections to be made.
Right, like they point to Genesis 1.1, which says, "In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth."
Right.
They argue that this aligns with the Big Bang Theory.
The prevailing scientific model for the origin of the universe.
Yeah. It's an interesting parallel.
It is.
The Bible describes a beginning for the universe, and science came to that same conclusion much later.
Through observation and calculation.
Exactly. Another example they give is the Bible's claim that all humans are descended from one man and one woman.
From Adam and Eve.
Right, as described in Genesis 2. And they connect this to modern genetics, which has confirmed that all humans do share a common ancestry.
That's fascinating.
And they even bring up how the Bible emphasizes creatures reproducing after their kind,
After their kind.
which they see as aligning with the concept of species in biology.
Right. Each type of organism reproduces its own kind.
Exactly. They also mention the account of a global flood in the Bible.
Noah's Ark.
Yeah. Which they believe explains certain geological features we see today,
Like what kind of features?
like those vast sedimentary rock layers
Hmm.
and the widespread fossil deposits. They say these could have been formed by a catastrophic flood event.
Interesting.
Now, of course, it's important to note that not all Christians or religious scholars interpret the Bible literally
Right. There's a whole range of perspectives on how to interpret these texts.
and how to reconcile them with scientific discoveries.
Exactly.
Our goal here is just to present these different viewpoints and let you, the listener, think about what resonates with you.
That's a good approach.
Yeah.
So with that in mind, let's look at another interesting argument that Answers in Genesis brings up.
Okay, what's that?
They suggest that some scientific observations can actually support a young universe and a young Earth.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
What kind of observations are they talking about?
Well, they bring up the existence of spiral galaxies.
Spiral galaxies.
Yeah. They argue that if the universe were truly billions of years old, the spiral arms of galaxies would be wound up much more tightly.
Oh, I see.
They should have lost their distinctive spiral shape.
So they're saying that the fact that we still see these spiral galaxies suggests the universe isn't as old as mainstream science says.
Exactly. They see it as evidence for a younger universe.
Interesting.
They also bring up the rapid erosion of continents.
Right, if the Earth were billions of years old, wouldn't the continents have eroded away by now?
That's their argument.
Yeah.
The fact that we still have continents is more consistent with a younger Earth.
And they bring up the mud on the seafloor again.
And the low sodium levels in the ocean.
Right.
They seem to be recurring themes in their arguments for a young Earth.
Yeah, it's like their go-to evidence. But mainstream science has explanations for these observations too, right?
They do.
Like with the spiral galaxies, they talk about density waves and star formation processes
Right.
that help maintain that spiral structure.
Over those vast timescales.
And with the continents, plate tectonics and mountain building processes are constantly uplifting and regenerating the land masses.
Counteracting the erosion.
So it all comes down to interpretation.
Exactly. Different interpretations of the same data.
Okay, so one of our sources actually mentioned a really interesting discovery
Oh, yeah. What's that?
made using NASA's Spitzer Space Telescope.
NASA.
Yeah.
That's cool. What did they find?
Well, the article from NASA Discovery News talks about the observation of protoplanetary disks.
Protoplanetary disks.
Yeah, these are swirling disks of gas and dust that surround young stars.
Like cosmic nurseries.
Right.
Where planets are born.
And the author of the article, Paul Hutchins, he connects these observations to the description of Earth's formation in Genesis 1.2.
Genesis 1.2.
Yeah.
What does that verse say?
He says, "Now the earth was formless and void, and darkness was over the surface of the deep, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the waters."
Okay, so how does that relate to these protoplanetary disks?
Well, Hutchins argues that these disks, being made of gas and dust, fit the description of Earth being formless and void in its early stages.
I see. So he's drawing a parallel between the Bible's language and these scientific observations.
Exactly. He also links the Bible's description of light emerging gradually.
From Genesis 1.3.
Right.
And God said, "Let there be light," and there was light.
Yeah. He links that to the process of planet formation within those disks.
So as planets form, They clear out the material around them,
Yeah, allowing light to shine through.
which leads to the sun, moon, and stars becoming visible.
As described in Genesis 1.16.
And God made two great lights, the greater light to govern the day and the lesser light to govern the night. He also made the stars.
Right. So he's basically saying that the Bible's creation account aligns with what we know about planet formation from science.
It's a pretty compelling argument.
And he points out that the Hebrew word for day
Yeah.
can actually have multiple meanings.
Not just a 24-hour day.
Right. It can mean
Perhaps.
longer periods.
Which allows for a more flexible interpretation of the creation account.
That could potentially align it with those vast timescales involved in cosmic and geological processes.
Right.
It's amazing how interpretations of these ancient texts can change as our scientific understanding grows.
It shows that the conversation between science and faith is always ongoing.
Yeah, with new discoveries and interpretations always coming up. Wow, we've covered a lot today.
We have.
From arguments for a young universe and an old universe, to scientific discoveries that seem to resonate with biblical accounts.
It's been quite the journey.
It really has. The relationship between the Bible and science is definitely complex.
And fascinating.
It is.
So as we wrap up this part of our deep dive, I think it's important to remember to approach this topic with an open mind.
Yeah, be willing to consider different perspectives and, stay committed to exploring the mysteries of our universe.
Through both the lens of science and the wisdom of ancient texts.
Well said. We've got one more part to go in our deep dive, so stay tuned because we're going to wrap up our exploration and leave you with some things to think about.
All right, so welcome back to our deep dive. This is the final part of our exploration of the intersection of the Bible and science.
It's been a fascinating journey.
It has, we've talked about. Scientific arguments
Right.
for the age of the universe. Discoveries that seem to line up with the Bible, and we've seen how people interpret both scientific data and religious texts in different ways.
Absolutely. A lot of different perspectives out there.
So as we wrap things up,
Yeah.
I want to shift gears a bit
Okay.
and talk about what this all means for us, for you listening.
What does all mean?
Yeah, because it's one thing to explore these ideas, but how does it connect to our lives?
That's the important question.
So here's something to think about. How can understanding this back and forth between science and religion, especially the Bible, help us make sense of the world today?
That's a tough one.
It is.
I mean, we're constantly bombarded with information,
Yeah.
often presented with absolute certainty.
It can be overwhelming,
It really can.
trying to figure out what to believe.
So how do we navigate all of this?
Hmm.
Especially when it comes to topics where science and faith intersect.
Well, I think one of the key takeaways from our deep dive is that knowledge is constantly evolving.
Okay.
What we thought we knew for sure can change based on new discoveries or new ways of interpreting the data.
So we have to stay curious and be open to new ideas
Absolutely.
and be willing to adjust our understanding
Yeah.
as we learn more.
It's all part of the journey.
Exactly. And I think it's important to remember that science isn't the only way to understand the world.
Right.
We have religion and philosophy and personal experiences. All of these things contribute to our overall understanding.
It's not about choosing one over the other. It's
Yeah.
about recognizing that they can all work together to give us a richer, more complete picture.
It's about embracing the complexity and being okay with not having all the answers.
Exactly.
I think it comes down to intellectual humility.
Humility.
Yeah. No single perspective has it all figured out. We need to be open to different viewpoints.
Even the ones that challenge our own beliefs.
Exactly. This journey of understanding is a lifelong process. It's about being curious and open-minded and engaging with all kinds of knowledge and experiences.
Well said.
So that brings us to the end of our deep dive. We hope you've enjoyed this exploration with us.
It's been a pleasure.
But remember, the conversation doesn't end here. Keep questioning, keep exploring, keep seeking. Until next time, keep diving deep.